As we start to work with clauses, we're going to have to be able to identify the subjects and predicates of various clauses to figure out where they're at, how many there are, what type of sentence we're looking at. So let's practice finding the subject before we go any further. And in this lesson, we'll give the definition of a subject, where subjects show up in sentences, and some common mistakes to avoid. So the subject is the part of the sentence that is doing the action of the main verb. It's usually a noun or a pronoun. It can also be a longer phrase. Here are 4 ways a subject appears in a sentence. It could perform an action, it's described, it's identified, or it has an action done to it. But in general, if you're finding the subject, you can start with the verb. So in this sentence, the students represented Kiribati at the Model United Nations Conference in New York. Find the main verb. Ask the right question. Who or what is doing the action of the verb? Who or what represented Kiribati? And the answer to that question is the students. Therefore, the subject is the students. There exist both simple and complete subjects. The simple subject of a sentence is a word like Pierre. Just one word without any modifiers. So in a complete subject, that tall boy, we have our simple subject, boy, and all the modifiers that it might be in front of or after it. Subjects can show up in front of the predicate. That's the most common way, as in Julie walks, Paul is kind. You can have compound subjects, maybe Ted and Susan ate pizza, or Bill and Jenny are great. We can also reverse the order and say something like, among the ingredients is stardust, and the subject is over here. In the passive voice, where we start with the direct object, use a form of to be, and a past participle, we might have the subject at the end, or it might be implied. My fence was destroyed by beavers. Beavers did the actual destroying. Then, in sentences like, show me the money, those commands, the subject is implied. It's nowhere written into the sentence. One common mistake is that phrases near the subject obscure the subject. So they can come before or after. For example, if we said, faced with ice and snow, squirrels hibernate. Squirrels is the subject. Before the turn of the century, I celebrated my 13th birthday. I is the subject. And who is as strong as you and me? It's George. Which George? George of the jungle. Who phoned the police? It's very tempting to say neighbors phoned the police. In this case, this prepositional phrase, of my neighbors, is describing all. It is actually all who phoned the police. It's the bark that can be very brittle. Specifically, we're talking about the bark of some coniferous trees. These prepositional phrases that modify our subject, they confuse us. We think that this word is the subject, but it's not. Then there's this concept called appositives. These are nouns that rename or replace a noun right next to it. So the most common form is something like this. Your friend Bill is in trouble. What's the subject? It's actually friend. Bill just narrows down, out of all the friends that you know, we're talking about Bill. So it's essential. Or if I said the popular U.S. president, and then I named that president, well, we could be talking about there's more than one popular president, so it's essential information. But it's actually the president that was known, not John Kennedy. Then, if I reverse things, suddenly John Kennedy is the subject, and here is some extra information surrounded by commas, non-essential. And occasionally, we can put these appositives before the actual subject. Notice the comma there. And these are nouns that rename the subject of the sentence. There's also expletives like, there are 3 burgers left, or there is a strange man at the door. To find the subject, you should ask who or what is or are there. The answers are 3 burgers and a strange man. And in imperatives like, show me the money, who or what will show me the money? The answer is you. The subject is therefore a person who may not be named in the sentence. Attributive nouns function as adjectives. So morning sometimes is a noun. If you stick it in front of air, perhaps it's just describing. Art is not the subject here, it's teacher. And government is describing official, telling you which type of official, in the same way that teacher is modifying college. Now there's a fine line here between compound nouns and nouns functioning as adjectives, but just note that you might have multiple nouns in a row, and it's the final one that is the subject. Sometimes verbals can be the subject of a sentence. So these are verbs like signing or infinitives like to think that function as the subject of the sentence. And there might be a whole phrase there. Signing your child up for every last sport, it would be our complete subject, or to think kind thoughts would be our complete subject. But there's not a traditional noun as the subject in either one of these sentences. Next up, passive versus active voice. Passive voice is a quality of a verb that describes when the subject of a sentence is acted upon by the verb. For example, the sheriff was shot. The action is done to the sheriff. When the opposite is true, the subject is acting out the verb, it is said to be in the active voice. For example, I shot the sheriff. I am completing the action instead of having the action done to the sheriff. Here's two examples. In this first one, the bridge was blown up by the engineers. The engineers are the subject. Or we might say the cows will be milked after tea. Who's doing the milking? It doesn't really say. So sometimes that subject is directly stated, sometimes it's implied. So let's review some different examples of subjects. The show must go on. The sheep herd fled the pasture. Though that's a noun, it's not the subject. Last night's dinner was prepared by my grandmother. The dinner didn't do the preparing. Every night in the old age home, the seniors have a pillow fight. Our main verb is have. Who is actually having this fight? It's the seniors. A few wispy cirrus clouds swirled through an expanse of blue sky. There's lots of modifiers here. But what swirled? It's the clouds. Did you enjoy your birthday cake? So it's a little different with questions, but you are the one enjoying things. We have Little Red Riding Hood, but notice the apostrophe S. It's the grandmother that was sick. Studying abroad is a verbal that's acting as the subject here. And notice that we have this prepositional phrase, but we ignore that, and it's the license plate that was always covered in mud. Here we have the subject and predicate inverted, and a pink wig, the subject, is at the end of this sentence. And here is a long phrase that helps to modify our actual subject, company, and then we identify it as Polaroid.